Judge Maxwell Carter insults Michael Jordan. The tension in the federal courtroom was palpable, as if every breath taken was one of anticipation. Those present in the courtroom knew that something monumental was about to unfold. It wasn't just because of the high-profile case at hand, but because of the presence of one individual, Michael Jordan. However, no one could have predicted that at that very moment a battle between justice and power would begin to take shape. Judge Maxwell Carter, notorious for his contempt toward those advocating for the welfare of the people, had an unmistakable look of disdain as Michael Jordan walked into the courtroom. Carter was a man of power, deeply entrenched in his sense of invulnerability. He believed that no one, no matter who they were, could challenge his authority in his own courtroom. And yet, as Michael entered the room with a thick stack of documents in hand, Carter felt the sting of defiance. The very presence of someone like Michael in his domain was a challenge that Carter couldn't ignore. With a sneer, Carter addressed Michael with a tone dripping with contempt. "Welcome to my courtroom, Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "This isn't a stage for celebrities. Your title means nothing here." These words were not just a personal insult to Michael, they were an attack on everything he represented. The very essence of respect for the rule of law, fairness, and the fight for what was right. Carter, in that moment, saw himself as the embodiment of power, and Michael, to him, was nothing more than an inconvenient disruptor. But Michael, undeterred, stood tall and responded calmly, unwavering in his resolve. "I'm not here to prove my title, Your Honor. I'm here for the truth," he said, his gaze never leaving Carter's. In that moment, Michael understood something that Carter could not grasp. The truth does not bow to arrogance. It stands firm, waiting to be revealed. Carter, visibly rattled by Michael's calm defiance, grew more agitated. "Oh, really? And you think you can lecture me on justice?" Carter barked. "You're just another puppet for the conservatives." His words were meant to diminish Michael, to put him in his place, but Michael's response was not one of bitterness or anger. Instead, he delivered the most powerful thing he could offer, the truth. Michael wasn't there to play the game that Carter was so used to, the game of power and manipulation. He was there to show the world the truth that Carter had been desperately trying to suppress. Michael's response was deliberate and confident. "I'm not here to lecture you, Your Honor. I'm here for justice." His words cut through the tension in the room, a reminder that truth cannot be twisted or silenced, no matter how hard someone tries. In this moment, Michael embodied the essence of what it means to fight for justice, not through loud protests, but through quiet, unyielding strength. His stance wasn't about proving a point or humiliating Carter. It was simply about standing firm in the face of overwhelming opposition, knowing that truth has its own power. And though Carter tried to belittle him, it was clear that Michael's resolve was something Carter would never be able to break. Michael Jordan defies the judge. The courtroom felt heavy, as if it were an arena where two very different worlds collided. On one side stood Judge Maxwell Carter, a man who had become so entangled in his own arrogance and power that he believed himself untouchable. On the other side stood Michael Jordan, a man who, though outnumbered and facing a system of corruption, was driven by an unwavering sense of justice. The confrontation between them was not merely about a case. It was a battle between truth and manipulation, between honor and self-interest. When Judge Carter insulted Michael, he expected the typical reaction. He was accustomed to those who would shrink under his glare, those who would falter in the face of his condescending remarks and inflammatory accusations. But Michael did not flinch. Where Carter saw weakness, he encountered resolve. Michael Jordan's response was not one of retaliation, but of steadfastness. A calm yet powerful defiance that pierced the tension in the room. His refusal to back down was rooted in something far greater than the case at hand. It was about the very principles of justice, honesty, and integrity that Carter had long abandoned. Carter's contempt for Michael was palpable. With every insult, he sought to reduce Michael to nothing more than a political pawn, a puppet with no voice of his own. "This isn't the White House," Carter sneered. "Your title means nothing here." He expected Michael to be intimidated, to apologize or retreat, as others in his courtroom had done in the past. Instead, Michael held his ground, his posture unwavering, his eyes locked with Carter's, and in that gaze was a quiet power, one that Carter could not diminish. Michael's response was deliberate, measured, and profound. "I'm not here to lecture you, Your Honor. I'm here to testify to the truth," he said, his voice cutting through the courtroom's tension like a blade. His words weren't a challenge to Carter's authority. They were a reminder that no matter how powerful someone becomes, the truth remains invincible. Michael wasn't there to argue about politics or point fingers. He was there to fight for something much more important, something that transcended the boundaries of partisan lines: justice. What set Michael apart wasn't just his ability to remain calm in the face of aggression. It was the depth of his conviction. In that moment, he became more than just an individual fighting for a cause. He became a representative of all who had been silenced, overlooked, or manipulated by those in power. Michael knew the stakes. He understood that if he allowed Judge Carter to control the narrative, if he let Carter's insults deter him, it wouldn't just be a loss for him. It would be a loss for truth itself. And so he stood firm. Carter, however, could not comprehend Michael's resolve. To him, power was everything. He had built his reputation on intimidating those who dared to oppose him. His entire identity was bound up in this facade of authority. But Michael's defiance cracked that facade wide open. When Carter tried to label him a puppet of the conservatives, Michael calmly turned the tables, refusing to be defined by someone else's narrative. "I'm not here to lecture you, sir. I'm here for justice," Michael replied, his words unshaken. In that response, Michael made it clear that he wasn't interested in engaging in petty political squabbles. He was after something much more profound, something that transcended partisanship. His defiance wasn't born out of a desire to prove Carter wrong. It was born out of a duty to the truth. And in the face of Carter's condescension, Michael showed what true courage looked like. The ability to stand firm even when the entire system seemed to be against you. The courage to speak out when everything else around you tries to silence you. Michael's words were not just a defense of himself. They were a challenge to Carter's entire worldview. He wasn't just contesting a single accusation. He was calling into question the very foundation of Carter's authority. Michael's willingness to stand up to Carter revealed something fundamental. When justice is at stake, the truth cannot be ignored. It will persist, regardless of the power wielded against it. As the courtroom watched in stunned silence, Michael's resolve became a symbol of something much greater than a single courtroom confrontation. It was a reminder that no matter how high someone may climb, no one is above the law. Michael was not fighting for personal victory. He was fighting for the integrity of the system itself. His defiance was a testament to the fact that the truth, when spoken with conviction, is not just powerful, it is unstoppable. Through this moment of defiance, Michael became a beacon of hope for all those who have ever been oppressed, marginalized, or disregarded by those in power. In the face of contempt, he showed what it means to stand firm, to be unshakable, and to fight for justice, no matter the cost. His defiance was not simply an act of rebellion. It was an act of profound courage, rooted in the belief that justice must always prevail. Michael Jordan exposes Carter's corruption. As Michael Jordan stood firm in the face of Judge Maxwell Carter's insults, the stakes of the courtroom drama shifted from a mere legal battle to an existential confrontation between truth and corruption. For Carter, a man who had built a career on manipulating the law for his own gain, the prospect of his deception being exposed was not just a professional setback, it was a threat to his very identity. And yet Michael, with unwavering focus and a deep-seated belief in justice, was determined to bring the truth to light. The tension in the room grew palpable as Michael continued to present his evidence. Every page he turned seemed to chip away at the veneer of respectability that Carter had spent years building. The judge, who had once prided himself on being above reproach, now found himself on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure as Michael methodically dismantled his authority. Carter's once confident demeanor began to crack, revealing the vulnerability hidden beneath his facade. It was clear Michael Jordan was not only challenging the judge's legal rulings, he was exposing a deeply entrenched system of corruption that had been allowed to fester unchecked. Michael's strategy was simple but devastating. He didn't need to shout, accuse, or protest. He simply needed to show the evidence. Each document, each statement, and each transaction laid bare the truth of Carter's involvement in financial misconduct. an intricate web of illicit payments and offshore accounts that linked directly to his rulings in cases of political and financial significance. Michael didn't rely on empty accusations. He backed up every claim with indisputable proof. The first piece of evidence he presented was a bank statement showing a large deposit in one of Carter's offshore accounts. Michael's voice rang out clearly in the hushed courtroom as he laid out the timeline. A donation to the Liberty Fund, a group that had been linked to political interests, had coincided directly with Carter's rulings in favor of wealthy conservative donors. The judge's face blanched as the magnitude of what was being revealed hit him. "Your Honor, this is a financial transaction that cannot be ignored," Michael said, the weight of the truth settling heavily in the air. "This money was transferred into your account at the precise moment that rulings were being made in favor of those who could afford to pay for your silence." Carter's attempt to dismiss the evidence with a flippant wave of his hand was met with a steely gaze from Michael. "I've got more, Your Honor," Michael continued, calmly flipping to another page in his stack of documents. "Here, we have emails from your official account discussing the Liberty Fund's financial support for your decisions. You instructed them to ensure timely payments in exchange for favorable ruling." The room was silent, and all eyes were on Carter, who had no choice but to hear the damning facts laid out before him. The judge's anger, once a powerful tool for intimidation, now seemed small and ineffective against the tidal wave of evidence Michael had presented. His voice trembled with panic as he tried to dismiss the claims. "These documents are forged," he cried. "This is all part of a smear campaign." But the fear in his eyes told a different story. Michael's composure only grew stronger. "You can deny this all you want, Your Honor, but your actions speak louder than any words you can utter in your defense." Michael was relentless, each piece of evidence coming at Carter like a hammer to a fragile wall. The truth was unstoppable, and Carter knew it. The courtroom buzzed as Michael laid out more details. Transactions that involved several well-known conservative organizations and donors who had been connected to Carter's legal decisions. Each email, each bank statement, each document was another nail in the coffin for Carter's once untouchable position. The judge, now visibly sweating and losing his grip on the situation, was becoming increasingly desperate. He slammed the gavel down in a feeble attempt to restore order, but his authority was slipping away with every word that came out of Michael's mouth. "You can't hide the truth, Judge," Michael said, his voice rising with the quiet power of someone who had nothing left to prove except the irrefutable facts. "Every one of these transactions, every penny that flowed into your account, came with strings attached. You are not the protector of justice, you are its enemy." In that moment, Michael Jordan became more than just a man presenting evidence. He became a force for change, an agent of accountability. His fight was no longer just about a single case or a courtroom victory. It was about exposing the systemic corruption that had allowed men like Carter to thrive at the expense of justice itself. Michael's determination was unwavering, his courage inspiring those around him to stand tall and fight for what was right. And then, as if fate had orchestrated it, Michael presented the final piece of the puzzle. An email from Carter himself, sent just days before, instructing a subordinate to wipe all the files clean regarding a case he had just ruled on. It was the final proof, the smoking gun that exposed Carter's corruption beyond any doubt. As the email was read aloud, the courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Even the clerk at the desk, once a passive bystander, broke down in tears, unable to bear the weight of the truth. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice now calm but resolute, "you may try to deny this, but the truth is inescapable. This isn't about politics. This is about justice, something you've long since abandoned." Carter, now frantic and desperate, attempted to flee the room, but the officers in the courtroom swiftly intervened. His last-ditch effort to escape was a final act of cowardice, one that exposed just how far he had fallen. His claim that it was all a political attack fell on deaf ears. Michael Jordan had done the unthinkable. He had brought a corrupt judge to his knees, exposing the rot at the heart of a broken system. As Carter was taken away in handcuffs, Michael Jordan stood tall, not just as a victor in a courtroom battle, but as a hero who had fought for the soul of justice itself. His courage had dismantled the facade of power, proving that no one is above the law, not even those who sit in judgment over others. Judge Carter's panic and loss of control. As the weight of the evidence mounted against him, Judge Maxwell Carter's facade began to crack. He had spent years carefully constructing an image of himself as a man above reproach, a judge whose rulings were law and whose word was final. He believed that his position in the courtroom was untouchable, that no one, not even those with the most damning evidence, could challenge his authority. He had turned the courtroom into his personal stage, a place where he wielded his power with unchecked arrogance. But as Michael Jordan laid out the incriminating evidence, that illusion shattered. Carter's control over the situation slipped away as Michael's calm, methodical presentation continued. Each piece of evidence was like a well-placed strike against the fortress of Carter's carefully constructed empire. The judge's hands, once confident and steady, began to tremble. His once steady voice cracked, and his attempts to defend himself grew more frantic. Michael Jordan, unwavering in his mission to expose the truth, was not just challenging Carter's rulings, he was unraveling the very fabric of Carter's corrupt hold on the justice system. At first, Carter had tried to dismiss the evidence with mockery. He had waved away the bank statements and emails with the arrogant belief that his position would shield him. But as the truth became undeniable, the judge's anger turned to desperation. The smugness that had once defined his every move now seemed like a mask that was slipping away. His voice, once commanding, now carried the unmistakable tremor of someone who knew they were losing control. His gavel, which had once been the symbol of authority, was slammed down with increasing frequency, yet each strike only underscored his growing panic. "You're crossing the line, Jordan," Carter snarled, his voice shaking with rage as he desperately tried to regain his footing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." His eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for a way out, any escape from the trap Michael had so carefully set. But there was no escape. The more Carter tried to fight back, the more obvious it became that his entire defense was built on nothing more than lies. Michael didn't need to argue or shout, he simply continued to present the facts, each one more damning than the last. The evidence was undeniable, and Carter's attempt to deflect with insults and accusations only made him appear weaker. His words grew more frantic as he realized that no amount of bluster could erase the truth that was now staring him in the face. "Fake!" Carter screamed. "It's all a setup! You're lying! This is just a political plot to ruin me!" His attempt to assert control was pitiful, a desperate cry from a man who had long used his position to hide behind a veneer of respectability. His claims of innocence became increasingly hollow, drowned out by the mounting weight of Michael's evidence. And then, in a moment of complete desperation, Carter made a fatal error. He threatened those in the courtroom. "I'll make you regret this," he shouted, pointing at Michael, his face contorted with rage. His trembling hand pointed to the clerk, to the defense attorneys, to everyone in the room. His control had slipped so far that he was no longer capable of maintaining the order he had once commanded. The courtroom, once dominated by his presence, was now filled with murmurs of disbelief, whispers of shock, and even the occasional chuckle at his expense. The judge's frantic attempts to reassert authority only served to highlight how far he had fallen. His fear was palpable. The man who had once stood as an unchallenged figure of legal power was now reduced to a cornered animal, thrashing in panic. His previously sharp gaze had become wild, darting from one person to another, as if he were looking for an ally, someone to believe in his innocence. But it was too late. There was no one left to protect him. His reputation, his career, and his future had already been condemned by his own actions. As Carter continued to try to discredit Michael, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The audience, who had once been silent in awe of Carter's position, was now murmuring in disgust. Some had even begun to applaud Michael's unwavering pursuit of justice. It was clear to everyone that the judge's power had crumbled under the weight of his own corruption. And yet Carter was still trying to salvage something from the wreckage, unable to accept the fact that his empire of lies had finally collapsed. "Enough!" Carter screamed, his voice cracking. "I will not let you turn this courtroom into a circus." His wild gestures and frantic shouting only further demonstrated the depths of his panic. It was as though he was trying to hold together the shattered pieces of his dignity, but the cracks were too wide, the damage too great. Despite his fury, Carter's mind was racing. He knew the walls were closing in. He could feel the judgment of the people around him, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. And in that moment, something broke within him. No longer able to stand the pressure, he bolted for the exit. His attempt to flee, to escape the inevitable consequences of his actions, was a final admission of guilt. He had no more arguments, no more defenses. The only thing he could do was try to run. But the officers were already there, blocking his path. His desperation was now fully exposed for all to see. "I can't take this anymore," Carter cried, his voice raw with fear and defeat. His power had vanished, and with it his grip on reality. His final attempt to flee the scene was a last-ditch effort to escape not just the courtroom, but the consequences of his actions. As the officers restrained him, Carter's collapse was complete. The courtroom had witnessed the unraveling of a man who had once believed himself untouchable. But Michael Jordan had shown him, and everyone else, that no one is above the law, not even a judge who wields the gavel. Carter's arrest and the collapse of his corrupt empire. The moment of Judge Maxwell Carter's arrest marked the culmination of an intense and unforgettable sequence of events. A moment when the very foundation of his corrupt empire came crashing down. It was a defining moment not only for the man at the center of the storm, but for everyone in the courtroom. What had begun as a simple case involving a conservative charity now stood as a monumental trial for the integrity of the entire judicial system, and it was Michael Jordan, standing firm in the face of adversary, who had sparked this unraveling by forcing the truth into the light. As Judge Carter's frantic attempts to regain control of the situation grew more desperate, his vulnerability became more evident. The courtroom, once a place where his word was law, had transformed into a courtroom of reckoning. Every word he spoke, every movement he made only solidified the reality he could no longer escape. He had been caught. The very power he had wielded over others for so long now seemed weak, futile, and utterly irrelevant in the face of the truth. Michael Jordan's calm resolve had done something extraordinary. His pursuit of justice, unwavering in the face of ridicule, had exposed not just Carter's corruption, but the deeply entrenched systems of power that had allowed such behavior to go unchallenged. By laying bare the facts, bank statements, emails, recordings, he had demolished the wall of arrogance and deceit that Carter had hidden behind, and now Carter was exposed for who he truly was, a man who had used the law as a tool for personal gain, bending the system to his will at the expense of justice. The truth was relentless. As the evidence mounted, the weight of it became too much for Carter to bear. His confidence in his invulnerability had shattered. The very authority he had once wielded with such ease was now nothing more than a fragile veneer, one that Michael Jordan had peeled away piece by piece. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Carter's time had come to an end. And yet, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Carter refused to admit his wrongs. His attempts to fight back grew increasingly wild and incoherent. He tried to deflect, to insult, to lash out. His pride, his sense of self-worth, all rested on the illusion of power he had so carefully constructed. But that illusion was crumbling, piece by piece, under the steady pressure of the truth. In a final act of desperation, Carter bolted for the door. The image of him, once the embodiment of legal authority, running for the exit like a cornered animal, was a shocking sight for everyone in the room. The man who had once held all the power in his hands was now attempting to flee the very consequences of his actions. It was as though, in that final moment, Carter realized what everyone else had already known, that he had lost. His empire of lies, his carefully constructed world of deceit, had collapsed. As Carter rushed for the exit, two officers swiftly moved to block his path. He spun around, eyes wide with panic, and screamed, "I can't take this anymore!" His voice was high-pitched, cracking with fear and desperation. This was not the voice of a man who had once commanded respect. This was the voice of someone completely unmoored from the reality he had long controlled. The officers stood firm, their expressions resolute. They knew what had to happen next. Carter's resistance was futile. He had no power left to command, no authority left to wield. He was just a man, and he was now held accountable for the corruption he had long hidden behind the walls of his judicial position. In the chaos that followed, the courtroom erupted in a mix of disbelief, outrage, and, for some, a sense of vindication. The spectators, once silent in the presence of Carter's intimidating authority, now voiced their anger and disapproval. The truth had been revealed, and it was clear to all that the system, for all its flaws, had not completely abandoned the pursuit of justice. Michael Jordan's unwavering courage had led to the exposure of a corrupt judge, and now, that judge would face the consequences of his actions. As Carter was handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The gavel, which had once been his symbol of absolute power, now seemed like a distant relic of a man who had overstayed his welcome. Carter, once untouchable, was now the subject of ridicule and contempt. The people who had once feared him now saw him for what he truly was, a man who had sold out justice for personal gain. Michael Jordan's victory was not just a personal one, it was a victory for all those who had been wronged by a system that allowed corruption to thrive unchecked. It was a victory for the truth, for transparency, and for the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. The courtroom, once a place of oppression, had become a place of justice, and the man who had sought to manipulate it was now the one who would pay the price. As the doors closed behind Carter, his reputation in tatters, Michael Jordan stood tall. His mission was complete, but the impact of his actions would echo far beyond that single day in the courtroom. He had shown the world that justice, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise to the surface, and that, no matter how high someone climbs, they will eventually have to face the truth. The story of Judge Maxwell Carter's downfall teaches us several powerful lessons that resonate beyond the courtroom. First, it highlights the undeniable power of truth. No matter how high someone rises or how much power they amass, the truth will always prevail. Michael Jordan's courage to stand firm in the face of corruption shows us that when we act with integrity and focus on truth, it cannot be silenced. The story also teaches us the importance of courage in adversity. Michael's unwavering stand against a powerful judge reminds us that true courage is not avoiding conflict, but standing up for what is right, even when it feels like the entire system is against us. The story also emphasizes the need for accountability for those in power. No one, no matter their position, is beyond the reach of justice. Finally, the perseverance Michael displayed in presenting the truth, despite intense resistance, teaches us that persistence leads to victory, even when obstacles seem insurmountable. If you were inspired by Michael Jordan's courage and the victory of justice, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of truth, perseverance, and justice. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on our latest content. Comment below and let us know your thoughts on this incredible story. How do you think truth and courage can change the world? We love hearing from you, and your engagement helps us create more impactful content for you. Join our community today. Let's keep standing for justice together.